So this is a little bit of a shiur, a little bit of a study session. I will watch the time here, because in preparation for the High Holy Days, which are big days in the Jewish calendar, it seems really important, and I certainly value for myself a little revision, rereading some of the introductions to the days, entering the High Holy Days, reminding myself of those prayers that we only say throughout on 2 days during the year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So it's not really an overview, but it's just a little taster of some of these special prayers. And I want to begin with a quotation from the 2nd, 3rd century rabbinic text, which is known as the Tosefta. It's a parallel text to the Mishnah. You've probably heard of the Mishnah, Rabbi Judah the Prince's Mishnah. The Tosefta are all the things that didn't make it into the Mishnah. And the Tosefta talks about the prayers being long, which blessings, which benedictions are made long, the benedictions of the new year. So already, before we even touch the service, we know we're in for a bit of a marathon. Here's some advice in the Talmud to the Shaliach Tzibor. That's the person who leads the services. And actually, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we invite quite a lot of people from the community to read. So that's a bit of a marathon as well. And the advice here in the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Rosh Hashanah is one should always think through the prayers and then recite them. And actually it's good advice to really look through them, go through them, because not all of them are so familiar. So before I go on to the next slide, let me ask you, and you'll have to shout out a bit because I'm a bit deaf today, what do you think are the key themes that are associated with Rosh Hashanah? I'm only going to concentrate on Rosh Hashanah today. What do you think might be some key themes? Renewal, thank you. Yes? Sorry? Rejuvenation, yeah, because it's a new year. There's some heavy ones as well. Reflection, absolutely. Yeah, that's what was. Well, yeah, beginnings, yeah. Maybe teshuvah, maybe repentance. Okay, repentance. Yeah. There's some other themes that kind of are sort of like gongs in the service that sort of repeat themselves. Well, maybe they're not so obvious ones here. The Book of Life, have you come across that we wish each other that we may be inscribed in the Book of Life? So that's sort of renewal, rejuvenation, sort of that newness that may be inscribed in the Book of Life. There's a lot about God's kingship, sovereignty, God's dominion over all people. There's a lot about judgment and God remembering humanity's deeds and decreeing their sentence. There's quite a lot about God uniting humanity as one, and that God will extend divine sovereignty over everything, and all creatures will come to acknowledge God's dominion. So there's this kind of overarching sense of God's sovereignty over the world. And that's probably, without going into too much detail, because Rosh Hashanah, which, by the way, is not mentioned as Rosh Hashanah in the Hebrew Bible, it's not mentioned until rabbinic literature. It's called the Day of the Blowing of the Shofar, Yom Teruah, and the date, of course, is given, the first date of the 7th month, was probably the point at which kings were crowned. So there are a number of psalms that talk about the crowning of kings, human kings. So it's a day of proclaiming God's kingship and sovereignty. So let's look now at some of the prayers and blessings that express these ideas of particularly these three themes: sovereignty, judgment, and remembrance. And there are a number of names for Rosh Hashanah, and one is Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment, and the other is Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance, the day when God remembers us, thinks about us, and considers our deeds. So the first passage I want to look at, which has its own very distinctive tune as well, is inserted into the first blessing of the tefillah that we just recited. That's the blessing, if you want to check it out, that's on page 97. It's the one that's known as the Avot, the ancestors, that mentions Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And this is inserted just before the bit in italics, and it's only recited on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Remember us for life, for you, O sovereign, delight in life, and inscribe us in the book of life, for your sake, O God of life. And the idea of the book of life is quite an ancient idea, and I don't think it's limited to Judaism. I think it's found in other cultures and other traditions. So it comes as a refrain right the way through, certainly through Yom Kippur. So these are obviously also apply to Yom Kippur, some of these. Then there's, in the second blessing, which begins at the bottom of page 97 and goes on to 98, is another insertion. So the tefillah, the Amidah, these 7 blessings are expanded on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They kind of balloon out. And the second refers to God's mercy. Who is like you, source of mercy? In your mercy, remember your creatures and grant them life. So we're kind of, on Rosh Hashanah, throwing ourselves on God's mercy to remember us and also to have a bit of compassion on us, whatever we've done in the past year. Now, the third blessing is known as the Kedusha, and the short version of the Kedusha is on the evening service, page 98, that little 3-line paragraph in the Hebrew. In Shabbat, in the morning service, much longer. If you remember, we sing Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. A lot of it is sung responsively. But this really balloons out, and we have 3 passages that are inserted into the Kedusha, and they're known as the Uvechein passages. I'll go through them a bit quickly. I'm not going to read them, I'll just let you look at them. And they're called the Uvechein passages because if you look at them, here's number 1, they all start with the word Uvechein, and so. Inspire all your works to be in awe. A lot of emphasis on awe, on fear, on reverence. After all, what are these days called? The Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. This is the second one. Again, emphasis on reverence of God. Hope to those who seek you, courage to those who trust you in you. Fill your land with gladness and your city with joy. And then looking forward to redemption. And then the third Uvechein passage is the just shall see and rejoice. Violence shall rage no more. So looking forward to a period of time when the rule of tyranny shall pass away from the earth. So those 3 passages will appear unfamiliar if you're not familiar with the Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur services on Rosh Hashanah. You'll wonder, what are they doing? We don't say these on Shabbat. Then there is another little tweak to the Kedusha. If you look at the end of the Kedusha on page 98, that little 3-line paragraph in the Hebrew, you'll see that it ends with the words Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. Well, we praise you, Eternal One, the Holy God. Well, if you look at the slide, you'll see the very last line changes the wording to Baruch Atah Adonai HaMelech HaKadosh. We praise you, O God, the Holy Sovereign, Melech, King, again to emphasize this theme of sovereignty and kingship. And then I'm skipping one, but if we go to our familiar prayer for peace, known as the Birkat HaShalom, the blessing for peace, or the Birkat HaKohanim, it's sometimes called the blessing of the priests, you'll see that there's a little paragraph just before the end, before the closing eulogy, which is inserted into Sim Shalom, which is not in our daily or Shabbat one. May we be inscribed in the book of life and blessing for a life of goodness and peace. So these are some of the insertions into the Amidah or the Tefillah, this main daily prayer. Now let's look at some standalone. You may be familiar with the Avinu Malkeinu, maybe through its music. Avinu Malkeinu. So this is a litany. It's a request which is made up of different verses, all beginning with the phrase Avinu Malkeinu, and it goes back to a prayer in the Talmud that Rabbi Akiva once recited on a fast that had been proclaimed on account of an extended drought. In Orthodox synagogues, the Avinu Malkeinu is not recited. I'll just turn over so you can have a look at it. Any idea why it's not recited in Orthodox synagogues? Because it's really a series of requests and petitions asking God for things. And there is the tradition, and actually Ariel and you and I were just talking about this before the service. There is a tradition that on Shabbat or on a festival, you don't ask God for things. Even God needs a day off. But in liberal and reform synagogues, we do sing it, we do recite it. And by the way, some of those early insertions which ask God for mercy and to remember us were not very popular insertions into the Amidah. They were resisted by the rabbis precisely because they were requests, and you don't request anything of God on Shabbat or Yom Tov. I love this prayer. Where is it? If you look at the translation, this is the soft translation, right? Our Creator and Sovereign, be gracious to us and answer us, for there is little merit in us. Treat us with charity and kindness and be our help. But what does the Hebrew say? The Hebrew says, Avinu Malkeinu, Konenu Va'anenu. So our Creator and Sovereign, literally our Father, our King, have mercy upon us and answer us. Ki ein banu ma'asim. For there is not ein banu in us ma'asim, deeds. In other words, it says there's nothing, we have nothing at this point. We're really throwing ourselves on God's mercy and compassion. And I find that very powerful in the Hebrew. But our translators here felt, it's a bit harsh to say, really? Human beings have nothing to offer, but we have a little merit. So we ask God to literally, aseh imanu, do with us tzedakah. Tzedakah is really righteousness. Yeah, doing what is right, Chesed, which is loving kindness, which is a particular quality of God. V'hoshienu, and save us. Be our saving person. Or God, rather. Now, last thing, then we must hasten on. The last part of the service, of course, includes the most important part of the service, which is the shofar. Thank you very much. Yom Teruah, as it's called in the Bible. And around the blowing of the shofar are three sections. One is the Malchuyot, once again, kingship, sovereignty. One is Zichronot, remembrance again. And one is Shofarot, which is untranslatable, the plural of shofar. And traditionally, was traditional to have 10 verses from the Hebrew Bible on the theme of kingship, 10 on remembrance, 10 on the shofar. So if you look in traditional prayer books, that's how it's structured. Ours is structured a little bit differently. I won't go into all that at the moment. This is from our prayer book, just a sort of adapted from our Machzor, that says that Malchuyot acknowledge God, the verses of Malchuyot acknowledge God as creator of everything that is part of the universe. Zichronot recalls our history, tells us that God remembers our deeds. Shofarot remind us of the past and the future and point towards a redemptive future, something better in the future. And I just sort of thinking about how we relate these very, very ancient themes of sovereignty, remembrance, and the shofar to ourselves. And just a number of questions here that I think that we can think about in this period leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. How do we use or abuse the power or authority we have over others? How do we judge ourselves, or sometimes do we delude ourselves? What changes need to occur for us to be honest with ourselves? Shofarot, how can we use our own skills, powers, knowledge, compassion, love and sense of justice to bring good into the world? And lastly, as we move into the Aleinu on page 520, I want to tell you, we know the Aleinu as the part of our concluding service leading to the Kaddish. That's where we are most familiar with it. But did you know that it did not begin life at the end of the service as a prelude to the Kaddish at all? That actually it began life as a prelude, a kind of hymnic introduction, as somebody's written, to the 10 verses on sovereignty that precede the blowing of the shofar. And it appears first in the first known prayer book in the 9th century, known as the Seder Rav Amram. So if you look at the notes at the back of our Siddur, you'll often see SRA, that's short for Seder Rav Amram, which is the first sort of code, really, of Jewish prayers, first volume of Jewish prayers, which was written by Rav Amram, Babylonian rabbi, as a response to a question from a Spanish community: what prayers are we supposed to recite? And there you've got a sort of outline of all the prayers for all the festivals, Shabbat, daily, Passover, Seder, so forth. The Aleinu is there as part of the Rosh Hashanah service before the blowing of the shofar, and it wasn't until about the 14th century that it appeared at the end of the service before the Kaddish. It's very much our problem prayer, the Aleinu, which I won't go into now, but because of its traditional wording, its original wording, the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi wording slightly different, it laid itself open to repeated accusations against Judaism. And so it's been censored, it's been edited, it's been changed. not only by liberal Jews, but we have what we have now, which is an edited version. But I'll leave any questions to Kiddush when we go in, and if anybody wants to ask me any questions, because that was a bit of a race. And we'll go to page 520.